Return of the Mount Hua Sect. Chapter 274.
So prestigious sects don't have heads.
Hyunjung didn't know when his smile would leave his lips. He smiled while walking, while turning the doorknob, even while eating, and often he would cover his mouth. He couldn't help but feel it. Since he was the leader of a martial arts sect, he should be more restrained, but it was difficult to deal with his lips, which were constantly turning into a smile. Again, Hyunyoung was the calmest.
Take care of your body. What do we do if you cannot even handle your face in front of the kids?
Hyunjung and Hyunyoung looked at each other.
I don't want to hear that from you, of all people. What is that supposed to mean?
Hyunjung groaned when Hyunsang asked, Aren't you surprised?
What do you mean?
I mean, the kids are doing great. Isn't that surprising? At that, Hyunyoung smiled.
It is quite shocking, but what can be more shocking than when Chongmyung declared that he would break all their heads? Have you ever seen Chongmyung say something he wouldn't do? Isn't he a guy who often says nonsense, but never things that don't make sense?
True, but... Hyunyoung smiled.
If such a guy says he will break their heads, he will do it. But what do you have to worry about?
Hyunjung rolled his eyes. Hyunyoung said in a cold voice,
Now is the time when even sect leaders feel it.
What do you mean?
Mount Hua is strong.
Hyunjung was silent. It was the same thing he was feeling. Hyunyoung looked at the two of them and smiled.
It would be surprising if a child broke a beautiful tree, but would it be surprising if they broke a small sapling instead?
True.
At least, the children of Mount Hua make it a strong sect. It is different from our time, sect leader, so there is no need to be shocked at what the children do. It is a natural thing.
Hyunjung grabbed his thigh a little. These words were shaking his heart. Strong. Was Mount Hua ever called that in the past 100 years? Until now, the word strong was used solely for the other sects, but for a day to come when his sect would be called as such.
Other sects will soon recognize Mount Hua. Is there any reason for them to not do that? If we ignore the children of Mount Hua who smash the disciples of other sects, we are idiots.
Right.
So we just watch and protect them.
Hyunjung nodded.
We should be good manure for those children.
Seeing his expression, Hyunyoung raised his eyebrows.
Sect leader, I have a question to ask. How was the face of the Hainan sect leader? I think the rest of the Jongnam sect was probably watching it too. Please tell me. I cannot sleep because I am too curious about this.
How could a Taoist look for happiness in other people's misfortune? Then, Hyunsang asked, I am curious too, sect leader.
Don't be like that. Just talk. How was the expression of the sect leader of the Hainan?
It was rotten.
Jongnam. And the Jongnam. Jongrigok. That man must have been unable to get sleep tonight. His stomach must be hurting so bad from the good words he said.
Seeing Hyunyoung enjoying this like a child, Hyunjung smiled.
So very unlike you.
To be a Taoist and rejoice in others' pain and smile like this. Just where was Mount Hua going? Where? The next day, the disciples of Mount Hua who arrived at the hall walked in at different times. There were no spars for Mount Hua in the morning, so they had shuffled out slower. Chongmyung, who clung to the door of his room, said he wouldn't come, and the others had to pull him out. Anyway, it was almost noon when they all arrived at the hall. What? What is with the mood? The disciples of Mount Hua looked around. It was natural for everyone to look at them with such vigilant eyes. No, not just that. Of course, it was true that this much attention was unfamiliar, but that was only to be expected. Mount Hua's disciples weren't fools. What they did yesterday was bound to bring in such reactions. The problem wasn't their eyes, but the situation overall.
Ugh! Get out of my way! Out of my way!
The disciples of Mount Hua blinked their eyes, looking at the spar happening on the stage.
What is this? Did they bring in bandits?
The atmosphere of the competition was different from yesterday. Yesterday, there was a warm atmosphere. The disciples of Mount Hua had finished their spars without even seeing the other spars at all. But today, in one way, it looks like a dogfight. Jogol's mumbling was right. A bloody fight between dogs. The lively techniques weren't seen today. Instead, they were aiming for the life of each other, and their eyes were full of poison. What is with them? At Baekchun's words, Chungmyung smiled.
Why are you like that? If they came this far with a sword, they wouldn't only fight by sucking their thumbs and watching others play an active role.
Huh? Among those who won, were there any memorable ones? Baekchun thought about it and shook his head. None, but because I had to keep an eye on the spar of our people.
So you weren't watching others spar?
It wasn't that. Chungmyung shrugged his shoulders.
Yesterday, there were quite a few people who would have made a name for themselves if it had been a normal spar. There were ones with extraordinary skills. If the competition was happening in a calm atmosphere, usually these guys would have made a name for themselves and raised the reputation of their sect.
They were buried because of us.
Right.
Chungmyung chuckled.
They fought to the death and managed to win, but everyone spoke only of Mount Hua. Just how many people can endure that? Even I cannot tolerate that.
The gaze of Chungmyung moved over.
These are all people in different positions.
This was a story that went hand in hand with the shortcomings that Chungmyung saw from the sects of the past. No one understood that the basics were important. However, when one senses that their disciple is starting to fall behind others, the one who teaches them is the first to immediately get into techniques and not focus on the basics. Comparison was always the main culprit that ruined people.
Isn't it only human to like something and attempt it, despite not understanding it?
Right. Still, you brat.
Right. But the guy I hate the most comes to me and starts to brag. And he was the guy who was called a great scholar and was called a prodigy. The day the pillars of that house are pulled from underneath it is the day that house collapses.
Baekchun shut his mouth.
It was such a perfect way of putting it that he couldn't not understand it.
Even if Baekchun was currently in that situation, he would feel the same.
In that sense, I mean...
Chungmyung grinned and gestured to where the sect leaders had gathered.
What could those people have told their disciples when they went back to their residence? Right. It is okay to not stand out, but make sure to show your skills, right?
Right. Still, they're all the sect leaders of prestigious families.
Do you really think so?
Chungmyung smiled.
You might not understand.
Most people think that the sect leaders were some flavor of noble beings. But were they really?
They aren't.
Sect leaders were more secure than anyone. Leading a huge sect meant they had to feed, dress, and shelter so many. While they must be strong, they can't destroy their sect's reputation, and they needed to accept new disciples. As their reputation rises, disciples with better skills will come to them, and those with such skills will grow up and raise the reputation of the sect again. Sect leaders knew the importance of the snowballing cycle, leaving them no choice but to cling to the reputation of their sect. Isn't this what had happened to Mount Hua, which had lost its reputation? Chungmyung smiled. Perhaps they might not understand it yet. How impatient and obsessed the people who had experienced this cycle could get. He shrugged and said,
Do you think the kids will run wild without them saying anything?
Baekchun could say nothing.
See? Now, when we go up to the spar, everyone will be desperate to try and extend the length of the spar. Then what do we do?
What do you mean? Chungmyung smiled.
It changes nothing. The atmosphere has changed, but as long as we break some heads, it's fine.
And he looked back toward the spar.
Ugh!
My arm! A disciple's arm had been cut from a sword and was groaning in pain. When the sleeve stained with blood could be seen, it looked horrifying, but the winner looked happy. A spar was a task that needed one to be injured, and this atmosphere was especially overheated. A good atmosphere. Chongmyung smiled. A place to build friendships between sects. That is so fucking funny. What made it this way? Glory from Mount Hua was enough, and glory could not be shared with others. The only thing left for others was disgrace. Baekchun nodded his head. Chongmyung turned away from what was happening and looked at the sect leaders. You still have time, right? Being able to continue watching this means they had time on hand. If they were in the corner, they would be down here advising their disciples. Now, how long can you remain carefree? I have no grudges against you. Sure, the 9 great sects won union, and the 5 great families had ignored Mount Hua when it was in a crisis, but they weren't obliged to help it either. Besides, those who made that choice at that time had already died. He wasn't going to hold the descendants responsible for the actions of their ancestors. Ancestors were ancestors, and descendants were descendants. But one thing. Sasuk. Yes? Look, over there. The place where Chongmyung pointed to was the podium where the sect leader was sitting. Baekchun, who didn't understand, looked confused. Why? Doesn't that look infuriating? Huh? Baekchun's expression stiffened, and he looked closely. The sect leaders and the lords of the families were sitting on luxurious chairs, and in the back, with a small chair behind them, was their sect leader Hyunjung. The seats behind the 9 great sects won union. Although they were all the same sect leaders, they were differentiating between the sects with well-known names. Definitely infuriating, mumbled Baekchun, his eyes still focused over there. Chongmyung relaxed his neck. It made a cracking sound each time. Our sect leader over there is being treated like that because of them. I'm a little curious. What if we broke the heads of their precious little kids today? Will they be able to come and sit there tomorrow as comfortably as today? True, Baekchun replied coldly and smacked his lips. Then, shall we run around until the position changes? It's been a while since you said something I like. This is more like my Sasuk. Their sect leader smiled broadly as he looked at his disciples as if he enjoyed the seat he was in. When they saw that, their stomachs twisted. Parents will think of their child to be beautiful, even if they are an idiot. However, to Chongmyung, Hyunjung wasn't a lacking child. If Mount Hua had stood upright, he could have raised its reputation. I need to get it back up. It seemed like nothing, but it was actually the most important part. At that time, Gongcho, who was in charge, shouted, "Next, Baekchun of Mount Hua." As soon as the name was called, everyone there turned to the place where Mount Hua's disciples were. Then, while holding his sword firmly, Baekchun glanced at Chongmyung and said, "No worries. Huh? I will come back gloriously." It was a mistake to have dared put the sect leader of Mount Hua in the back. Seeing Baekchun move forward, Chongmyung smiled. Well, once in a while, you do say things I like. You have learned well. Very well.